takes a lot to drag me away from the garden in the summer, but the chance to visit my sister Kaeylea in Ireland and see my brother Kevin, who will be visiting at the same time, was too good to pass up. So today I'll share with you some of the steps I'm taking to prepare the garden for my trip to Ireland. My main concerns in preparing the garden for vacation are to ensure the soil is covered in order to retain moisture in the soil. Vertical plants are pruned and well supported. Pests and diseases are in check. The wild jungle look is tamed in order to keep the neighbors happy. There's enough moisture in the soil. And all ripe crops are harvested and eaten or preserved before I leave. So let's get started with our vacation prep. I'll start here with a good old-fashioned chop and drop of our fall-winter garden bed, which as you can see has a lot of plants that have gone to seed. This will return nutrients and organic matter to the soil and make room for new plants that are starting to emerge. As far as vacation preparation goes, it'll cover the soil, help retain moisture, and tame this wild jungle look that we have going here. Here I'm chopping and dropping mustard greens that have already dropped their seeds. I'm careful not to chop a radicchio plant in the same area that is just starting to go to seed. The plants that I'm chopping and dropping are cut all the way down to the ground. Letting seeds drop and self-sow gives us an abundant harvest without having to plant anything. This approach works great for our cold-hardy greens, but may not work well with other crops. There's also a lot of comfrey in the bed, but because the soil in this bed is already well covered, I'll drop it in the bed where the soil is bare. This bed could also use a chop and drop. There's comfrey, cold weather crops that have already dropped their seeds, a stray blackberry cane, and weeds. So let's get started. I simply cut the comfrey, blackberry cane, and other plants to cover the bed in mulch. Weeds that have gone to seed are discarded, but those that have not are simply pulled and added to the mulch. To finish chopping and dropping, I'll chop the comfrey from all of our comfrey patches and add it to garden beds. This is a great way to harvest nutrients from a part of the garden that isn't growing food and add those nutrients to where we are growing food. With the chopping and dropping complete, I'll now move on to our trellis plants to make sure they're properly supported and pruned. I'll start with our tomatoes. First, I'll top off tomatoes above the trellis. This will prevent a plant from toppling over and shading out the rest of the plant. It will also hopefully concentrate more of the plant's energy on ripening tomatoes. I'll use cuttings from the best plants to start clones for next year. The rest of the cuttings I'll just chop and drop as long as they're healthy and not infected with blight. In addition to topping off the plants, I'll prune suckers, remove leaves infected with blight, and tie off plants where additional support is needed. Now let's move on to our trellis pumpkins and squash. I want to make sure that the plants and fruit are well supported, that diseased leaves are removed, and while I'm at it, I'll check for squash bugs. I tied this cushaw plant to the trellis near its largest fruit, and I fashioned a hammock out of an old t-shirt for additional support. I then remove leaves from a pumpkin plant that are diseased or infested with squash bugs. These leaves and squash bugs will be bagged up and disposed of. I also check the bottom of the remaining leaves for squash bug eggs, but don't find any. After tending to the vertical squash and pumpkins, I move on to the tallest plants on the garden skyline, the Sunchokes, which are about 10 feet tall now. The plants are already tied to their trellis, but they've grown quite a bit since I last tied them off, so I tie them off again at the very top. Finally, before calling it a day, I check the zucchini plant for diseased leaves and squash bugs and find it to still be in excellent condition. That's all the time I have today to prepare the garden for my vacation. In my next video, I'll harvest all of the ripe crops, and I'll show you how I'm using them in recipes and how we're preserving them. I'll also determine if I need to water the garden before leaving on vacation. After taking these measures, I will feel better about leaving the garden during my vacation, but I have to admit, it still won't be easy. Well, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching. And until next time, remember, you can change the world one yard at a time.